Good morning, everybody. Warm welcome to this session, the first transport session of Climate Week. I'm Dominic Finn. I'm the head of transport here at Climate Group. Our flagship initiative is EV100, so it's a network of fleets all committed to the EV transition. Really looking forward to this discussion today. Really timely as you think about the political context we're in at the moment. It's obviously affecting many issues, and certainly around EVs, and that's what we're going to dig into today. The EV transition, and how do we press ahead? How do we continue to accelerate the EV transition given the political instability we're seeing here in the US, but globally? We've got a really fantastic panel of experts who are going to join me very shortly to share different perspectives, from municipal government perspective, from state government, federal government, also from a corporate and a fleet perspective. Going to be joined with them very shortly, but before then I'd just like to say a couple of words of context, just to set this session into context. We are going to talk about the nature of the challenge that we face. How do we press ahead with this transition? But it's also worth reflecting a little bit on the huge progress that we've seen over recent years, particularly over the last year when it comes to the EV transition. 2024 global EV sales were at 15%. The first half of this year, 23% global sales are electric. So we're seeing a massive spike, and that's not just happening in advanced economies, it's happening globally with countries like Vietnam now. 35% of new vehicles sold are fully electric vehicles. If you look at Thailand, over 20%, Brazil, Indonesia, Costa Rica, Ethiopia, a bunch of other markets are really spiking in terms of EV sales. This is now we're talking about light commercial vehicles and cars and vans essentially, but this is also now translating into the medium and heavy duty sector, with 4% of global truck sales projected to be 4% of global truck sales projected to be electric by the end of this year. So we have to take the positives. This transition is happening, and it's accelerating. It's undeniable we're in an unprecedented period of political instability. As I said, it's not just in the US, but in the EU, where we've got really good regulations around CO2 standards. They're under pressure for being weakened, inserting concessions for things like e-fuels. In the UK, where I'm based, really good legislation through the zero emission vehicle mandate. There's calls for that, for deadlines in that to be, or extensions to deadlines. In this legislation, we've seen the same in the US, obviously, with incentives being removed. Canada's mandate, reduced ambition there. So, and this is like in Brazil and a number of other markets. So we're in a place where we really need to defend good regulation as well as get more ambitious regulation in place to ensure that the EV transition happens in a way that's as smooth, swift as possible, that we glean all the economic as well as environmental benefits from it. So the transition's happening, it's accelerating. We're also seeing fantastic technology innovations as well. We've also got the Formula E vehicle out there in the lobby, charged by Fortescue, and all different. It's an example of quite a niche use case for electric, but now it's filtering into the kind of corporate world and commercial vehicles, passenger vehicles. There's lots of different kinds of vehicles now. Have come a long way from just being the Teslas available, and also the range is increasing rapidly. A Lucid Air, which is manufactured down in Arizona, has a range of 516 miles now on a full charge. So we're seeing range of vehicles really increasing, which makes them a lot more practical. So yeah, the technology is there, but we're seeing this context of political instability, and that's what we're gonna focus on today in this discussion. How do we cut through it? We need to depoliticize the EV transition. It is an environmental issue, of course, and as a climate group, we're focused on driving climate action fast. We want to drive down carbon emissions. 10 to 12% of global emissions come from road transport. If it was a country, it would be the 5th largest emitter in the world, road transport. We really need to do something about road transport, but leading with that as messaging is not the right approach. It's not going to cut through. It's not going to depoliticize. It will exacerbate issues. So how do we do that? We need to talk about economic impact of the EV transition. How is this going to support energy security? How will the EV transition create job creation? How will it align with industrial competitiveness? Things like that. And that's what we're going to drill into today with the discussion. How do we press ahead? How do we get these narratives, and where do these narratives come from? There's lots of different elements to this. As I mentioned, we've got some different kind of representatives from different groups joining us today. I'd like to welcome Mette Corban, who's the Deputy Mayor for London, to join for 10 to 15 minutes to have a conversation to start with. So London is my home city. I'm from the north of England originally, but my home city for 15 years, and I've seen firsthand the great work that London's done in terms of congestion zone, a clean air zone, investment in charging infrastructure, and also trying to win hearts and minds on the transition as well to electric vehicles and overcome lots of barriers there. So, yeah, just really warm welcome to you, Mette. Thanks for joining us for this opening session for transport today. Yeah, just hopefully my introduction to you has covered broadly kind of your role and how London shows some leadership. I just wanted to kick off with a question to you, Mette. If cities often described as engines of progress, from your vantage point, why is local leadership, and what role do cities have in driving this transition that perhaps national governments or global institutions can't?
Yeah, firstly, thanks, Dominic, and thanks to also to Climate Group for hosting us and obviously giving the opportunity for me to talk about London's success. I always talk about, transport and clean air as one of the reasons why I kind of grew to care about politics. I'm the Deputy Mayor of London for Environment, but I'm always honest, I'm not traditionally, I wouldn't classify myself as a traditional environmentalist. But partly the reason why I care about this issue is because when I was growing up, where I grew up in one of the most deprived parts of London, it was often kids like myself who suffered with stunted lungs through an air quality crisis that we didn't cause in the first place. And I think actually this is a massive social, racial, and economic justice issue. And it's actually about how do we think about, the green transition being an opportunity for us to actually think about improving and placemaking, which is very important. I think cities have to be at the forefront of that because ultimately they know their people much better. Before becoming the Deputy Mayor, I used to be a councillor in the east of London, where I used to lead both our environment and transport portfolio. And, some of the benefits that we brought to our neighbourhoods, thinking about, what we've been doing around sort of the clean air zone, traffic calming measures, the investment in sort of, for example, like doing more blended crossings, or operating our bus lanes to 24 hours to make sure that buses get around quicker and people are more incentivized to take buses, which obviously helps support working people too. The work we're doing around sort of dockless bikes. So you've got to look at this holistically around what we can do to make sure that we've got the right transition in our transport. And, in London, I always say, you're probably going to be the first crowd to know, I'm probably going to get in trouble for saying this, but when the mayor first got elected in 2016, experts told him it would take 193 years for us to reach legal limits of pollution levels. 193 years. We're on track to reaching it this year, and I just found out on Friday that London, for the first time since records began, has legal limits of pollution levels. That is a huge achievement, but that didn't happen overnight. That happened because we had bold political leadership. The world's largest clean air zone, the ultra low emission zone, has seen roadside nitrogen dioxide levels down by over 27% in outer London and over 54% in inner London, which is having a huge impact also on our hospital admissions going down related to respiratory health. So I think, there's so much good news stories that are happening in London, but ultimately it comes back down to the point you were asking, which is around cities being the one and giving the agency to sort of shape the future of their neighborhoods. And that's why I'm here. I'm here also with my capacity as being a board member of the C40 cities, really making the case actually to say, yeah, great, we're talking at this national, international level, but, how are you going to practically get it through without actually engaging city government, local government, really at the heart of this conversation?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I've noticed definitely the impact on air quality in London as well, living there. And I think that's been a really powerful message to cut through. It's people have all got family, all got old people or kids or someone vulnerable it's associated with them, and that clean air message just cut through. Do you still think that stands in the current political climate, this clean air message? Obviously it's a very pressing social issue and there's the economic case behind it, but is that one that you're leading with, or are you turning a bit more to these economic arguments as well? How are you communicating?
Ultimately, it's about the type of city we want to live in, right? So I think, I think sometimes when we talk about climate change or the green transition, I think often because we talk about it from a place of the sort of the doom and gloom, it feels quite overburdened for a lot of people. And we're not just doing it for that reason. Of course, we have to do it. Otherwise, none of us will be sitting here having this conversation because we won't have a planet to live in. But actually, it's about, why wouldn't you want to live in a city? Like, how many of you in this room would drink dirty water? None, right? Why would you drink dirty water? Why have we normalized breathing dirty air? Crazy, isn't it? Like, we've normalized something that should never, ever have been normalized. And so many people are impacted by that. Why wouldn't you want to live in a city where you have more access to green space? Recognizing again that I know from my city, having access to a garden is a luxury for a lot of residents. Having access to nature is a luxury for a lot of our residents. So where 54% of London's space is green space, blue space, but what's the point of London being the greenest city in the world if you can't access the green space? What is the point of London being the greenest city in the world if we have residents, for example, who are having to choose between heating and eating during the winter because energy prices are rocketing? So the point I'm trying to make to you is putting aside the kind of climate crisis argument for a second. It's like, of course you want to live in a city with better air quality. Of course you want to live in a city, for example, that you've got more access to green space. Of course you want to live in a city, for example, where, you've got much more better public realm. It's actually enjoyable. Many people don't have the option to say, hey, I don't like living where I live. So therefore, I'm just going to leave I'm going to go rent or buy somewhere else. Most people are, live like my neighborhood. Over 60% of people live in social housing, so they don't have that luxury to be able to leave where they live because they don't like the conditions. So the point I'm trying to make to you is I think people do care about it. What we have to do is talk about the tangible benefits that it offers them.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I suppose that moment you look back on things like smoking cigarettes or other areas, you look back and why was that normalized? Why was that normal? The same with clean air, but also the same with carbon emissions. And obviously we're bumping up against resistance to change from incumbent industries. It's not necessarily from individuals, and so we've done quite a good job, a fantastic job of getting the clean air zone in place, congestion zones in place in the context of massive resistance. I've worked in this kind of space for 10, 15 years, including on a clean air campaign, so I know the resistance you've encountered. I wondered if you can just talk to how have you. It's not just about winning individuals, the people's hearts and minds. It's about overcoming some strategic kind of tactic or strategic campaigns almost to try to undermine this. And that, have you worked with businesses to do that? Have you lent on the economic case of job creation, all that kind of thing? How have you overcome the barriers in London?
Yeah, so I agree with you. I think what we need to do is we need to build better, more broad alliances. And like, this can't be just politicians pushing ahead. It can't be campaigners just pushing ahead. We've got to work all hand in hand. And a big part of it is about measuring impact. That's one of the things I sort of learned from my experiences about making sure that you got a comprehensive monitoring network on all range of things. So, for example, when I was a cabinet member in transport, one of the things that we used to do, Dominic, was we'd measure, for example, we started measuring, as well as traffic reduction, roadside nitrogen dioxide levels reducing, footfall, bus speed times, for example. But also we started to measure, for example, Visa MasterCard transactions. And to sort of, because one of the pushback would get from people would say, oh, well, people aren't driving, so therefore, there's no more business coming in into some of the businesses. And that's a common misconception that you do get when you are rolling out some of these policies. What we saw in one of the schemes that we brought forward, I'm not joking to you, Visa MasterCard transactions in 6 months shot up 200% on that street. 200%. Because you had 16% more footfall, and those people are more likely to shop in the area. And then we complemented that with public realm improvement around like al fresco dining, for example, for our businesses. So it's got to be like a holistic package of things. So it can't just be seen as just traffic reduction and actually the switch away. You've got to think about how you actually give the carrot as well as the sort of the stick, as I say. So I think monitoring is really important. Being very transparent about your data. I think being open to listening and say sometimes, what, that scheme that we done actually wasn't really working, so we need to really actually rethink things and changing, because then you don't come across like you're just doing it for the sake of doing it. I think you've got to be open to listening. The congestion charge, for example, in London, we've had a whole number of concessions that we've been offering residents, like EV cars, for example, or car clubs, and others as well. So I think, there's a whole range of things that we could do. But just to say as well, in London is that the story around sort of our EV transition is also incredible, right? Like if you think about, we've got the highest number of zero emission buses for any Western city, over 2,350 zero emission buses right now. We've got over 23,000 EV chargers across our city, with a plan to get to 40,000 over the next few years as well. 60% of our taxis are electric cabs as well, the black taxis as well. So we're doing lots of really good work in that industry too. So there's a whole package of interventions that we're making that's going to hopefully help us essentially become much more a livable city.
Yeah, very conscious of time. I know you've got a busy. Well, I've got a kind of closing questions just to draw things out a little bit to the context for this session. So you're talking about how you're getting things done in London, in a very practical sense, delivering it. There's a bit about all that ambition. Is ahead of national ambition? The charging infrastructure, the clean air zone, pushing that through is kind of, you're going ahead of regulation, ahead of what you require. But just that's one element of how you can influence national government. I wonder if you could talk a bit about that. You mentioned C40 and your role within that, but what's the role of municipal governments more broadly in helping us to press ahead, politically as well as practically in terms of implementing?
Yeah, I mean, look, as I say, city governments are much more closer to people, obviously locally, because they're delivering practical things that make a difference to how people get around the city, how you collect waste, how you consume food, all of these sorts of things. And I think, like if you look at C40 cities, we're already sort of way ahead of the curve when it comes to national governments. And one of my biggest worries as we approach COP is that I don't know if we're going to get the level of ambition that we need. I think New York Climate Week, by the way, is a sign of strength in some ways, because I know people coming into this Climate Week was a bit worried about, I know it feels quite tough right now, isn't it? Like in so many different ways. And I think this testament to, the climate group and the team here, who've been able to put on such a big show with over 1,000 events, and actually shows that there are a lot of people that want to take action. I think cities have to be at the forefront of this conversation. You cannot have a conversation about how you tackle the climate crisis just with national governments. I've been in so many rooms, I can't explain to you, where so many times, both through being a councillor and since being deputy mayor, where governments sign up to things and they just haven't consulted city governments or local government around how they're going to actually implement it. And these are the ones who are going to have to implement it. Like if you talk to me about retrofit, for example, government's got a massive retrofit strategy, and to be fair, they worked really close with us in London. But like, if you go out and make a big announcement on retrofit, but you haven't consulted the delivery partner, which is us, how on earth are you going to achieve that? So I think cities absolutely have to do it. I think we're already demonstrating, as I say, that cities are doing incredible work. We spoke a lot about transport. One thing I would encourage you all to do is check out London's construction industry and the work that we've been doing around to improve air quality around our machinery in the construction industry is top standard. It's as successful as the ULEZ, as the World Cleanest Air Zone as well. And it's a holistic approach around what we're doing to make sure that we're helping essentially create a much more fairer and greener London.
Fantastic. I wasn't aware of that. I should know that, living in London. But well, thanks so much for sharing all that insight candidly. And can
I just say one last thing as well? What's really important in this conversation as well is just the kind of bold political leadership that you need. I spoke about that 193 years. I don't know how many of you have followed sort of London Story when we were implemented the ultra low emission zone and sort of the world's largest clean air zone. But that was a year out before the election. And most politicians, I kid you not, most politicians would just say, hey, and to be fair, probably advising you, people saying to you, just say, put this off till after, or, is it really worth risking your action? And I remember, I wasn't deputy mayor then, but I remember speaking to Sadiq at the time, and this always stuck with me because I think it also teaches you a lot about the type of politician that you want to be. And he always says, look, I know my people voted for me, and I know what they expect of me. They expect me to not kick the can down the road. They expect me to bring forward bold action that's going to help drastically improve their life. And ultimately, if they decide that this isn't the right course of action, they will tell me through the ballot box, right? They have that say to have it. And for me, it's, that level of principle that you can have together with governance, I think is so important. And I think that's why C40 is really important. It's actually because between all mayors across the world, whether it's around resilience, whether it's around air quality, whether it's around what we're doing on adaptation, we're constantly supporting each other to make sure that we're all, essentially delivering for our residents.
Well, it's fantastic and refreshing to hear about politicians looking at it that way, and I suppose we need a bit more of that proper political leadership. And so thanks very much for sharing all that. It's really interesting, and keep it up, keep going. We need it more than ever, and I hope the rest of your Climate Week's a success as well. And catch you again soon, hopefully.
Right, thanks, Dominic. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, that was really good. Appreciate it. Okay, great. So some refreshing insight from a London perspective there. As I mentioned, we've got a really great panel discussion now coming up for the next 20 minutes or so. I'd like to welcome Chair Randolph, who's the chair of the California Air Resource Board. California Air Resource Board sets the strictest emission standards across the United States, and also, I think it's fair to say, has been largely responsible for California leading the global EV transition in terms of manufacturing uptake of electric vehicles. I'd like to welcome Josh Green, who's the founder and CEO of Inspiration Mobility, a fleet electrification and corporate electrification solution provider dedicated to accelerating the transition to zero-emission vehicles across North America. I'd also like to welcome Albert Gore, who's the Executive Director of the Zero Emission Transportation Association, which is a federal coalition of companies working to accelerate the transition to 100% electric vehicle sales in the US by 2030. So thanks very much to you all for joining the discussion today. Really looking forward to this. As we discussed backstage, we've got a really interesting mix of perspectives here from a state's perspective, from a corporate and a fleet perspective, and also experiencing federal decision making and a bit around how do we make these arguments, these economic arguments, and to go forward with this transition. I've got an opening question which I'd like to put to you all, perhaps to start with you, Chair Randolph. If you imagine the ideal partnership between businesses and policymakers for accelerating EV adoption, what would it look like in practice, and what's an example that you can provide that would give you confidence we can get there?
Yeah, so at the Air Resources Board, we have a lot of collaborative work that we do. Unfortunately, the industry seems to be running away from that collaborative work a little bit, and that's been challenging, but we still have some really wonderful partners. I'll give you an example. In Los Angeles, we have something called the Transportation Electrification Partnership, and that brings utilities, it brings infrastructure providers, it brings a few stalwart OEMs who are still engaged. It brings local businesses, local government, the city of Los Angeles, the county of Los Angeles, all together to meet regularly, talk about deployment challenges and issues that we're seeing in both the light duty and the heavy duty space. And that the partnership is under the auspices of the LA Clean Tech Incubator. So we have an opportunity to meet with some of the companies that Lacey is supporting. So for instance, there's a company that does charging repair, right? So they contract with the infrastructure providers and go do repairs. So that's an example where we can get into the nitty-gritty of implementation and not just the big policy picture.
Great, thanks. So the same question to you, Josh.
Yeah, I think we've seen some very interesting partnerships at the utility and city level to help advance fleet electrification in specific instances. So, for instance, in Pennsylvania, we work with one of the largest operators of taxi fleets in the country, and they operate about 3,300 taxis in 32 different cities. And in Pennsylvania, we work with both the utility and the state environmental program to secure grants for both electric vehicles to actually offset the cost of adopting the electric vehicles, as well as for the installation of high-speed charging at their property that serves not only their fleet, so it helps their drivers who are worried about range anxiety and because they drive 100, 150 miles a day, and many of them do not live in a single-family home where they can install a home charger. So they need access to reliable, high-speed charging on a daily basis. Working with utility, we got make-ready incentives. We had their contractor that we worked very closely with on the installation of those chargers. And together now we have an operating high-speed charging hub, which not only serves the drivers, but also serves other commercial fleets in the area. Public drivers, a lot of rideshare drivers are now using that, and is leading to a relatively quick adoption now of electric vehicles in their fleet, which I think is about, if memory serves, about 120 taxis. And we've done that with them in Kansas City, which is their headquarters, and it's now a model for other cities among the 32 cities they operate in.
That's great. Well, I think we'll return to that, how the market's taking the lead as well. These kind of partnerships are enduring or even developing, regardless of political context. But yeah, over to you, Albert, if you could respond to that question.
Sure, and I think these are partnerships that are in part a result of public policy, but now I think will endure, beyond some policies that are now ending. The EV manufacturing sector has anchored a lot of investment in the midstream and upstream supply chain in the United States and among our trade allies, by pulling a lot of that material into the U.S. manufacturing sector. Now, that was driven in part by some of the requirements and the tax credits for new EVs that are expiring this month. But a lot of the investment has been made. So there's hard work being done right now to ensure that we don't lose that momentum, because it's very, very important to have demand that you can rely on in order to mitigate risk for these investments in, say, battery materials and battery components. And so, we're actively trying to support those partnerships that do exist and find new ways to mitigate that risk, pull all of that material and investment into the United States so that the whole country has a stake in this, whether they're considering an EV for the next car or whether they work in the utility industry or the mining industry or elsewhere in the manufacturing sector. So, I think it's been really important. It wasn't the difference maker in the reconciliation process, but it was, I think, it continues to be really important to highlight those partnerships and why they exist.
Yeah, that definitely resonates from our perspective. We're EV100, we have 120, 130 companies, global companies, large demand-side companies, so the fleets. And what we hear clearly from them is regulatory certainty gives confidence to invest, for them to invest in these fleets and to invest at scale. And, for people at the fleet level, to get the backing of the board, say this is where the regulation is going, we can justify the investment going there. So I think the same is required, but just to, we're talking about political, where there's not regulatory certainty, there's political uncertainty. So I just wondered a kind of a follow-up question. Can you think of any specific strategies that have helped turn business policy partnerships into durable coalitions that outlast political cycles? So how can we, in the absence of that really strong political certainty, is there a way we can press ahead? And yeah, really interesting insight on that.
The tried and true strategy is to have a really big pack, but I think that's the challenge for industries that are not incumbents and for whom there is a lot of capital investment necessary. In fact, every dollar has to be weighed against its value in investing in building up manufacturing capacity or distribution capacity in order to bring down the cost, which is true of every new technology, very much true of batteries and EVs. We know batteries and EVs are on a trajectory that will bring the cost to, to parity with gas vehicles and below, but that requires scale. That requires much more investment. It requires certainty, regulatory certainty, but also aggregated demand that you can count on. So in the absence of the same type of pact that incumbent industries have, I think there have been really solid coalitions developing across the clean energy sector, because this is not unique to EVs, but that really are anchored in the communities where new businesses are being created, new manufacturing facilities, and all of the ancillary investment that goes along with that. It takes a little bit of time for that to take root and become the type of grassroots support that is durable beyond political cycles, and we're like right on the cusp of it. So I think just because it didn't make the difference in the legislative process this year doesn't mean that it didn't come close, and I think it deserves a lot more attention and support.
Yeah, that definitely resonates. I imagine you have something to say in this as well, Josh. I mean, you're see a business, but you're working closely with other organizations, fleets, to try to create kind of aggregate a voice and that clear demand signal, aggregate demand. How are you finding that within the current political context? And what if you could share some reflections on that, on its role in driving progress?
Yeah, I think Albert has been talking about the OEMs and production of electric vehicles. I want to talk a little bit more about the deployment side and the adoption of electric vehicles by businesses, by commercial fleets, which is where we focus. And I would say, though the topic here is a shifting political landscape, and you asked the question, Dominic, in a shifting political landscape, or in an era of retrenchment of some EV supports, how can we continue to make progress? I want to focus on the micro, which is at the company level. And start out by saying, making somewhat of a counterintuitive statement, which is that there has never been a better time to electrify commercial fleets than today. So the removal of the federal tax credit impacts the margins of a commercial fleet, whether it's a 500 vehicle fleet, 5,000 vehicle fleet, 50,000 vehicle fleet, and we work with companies at all those levels. All of them have untapped, huge opportunities to electrify their fleets with vehicles that will save them money, be more reliable than their internal combustion engine counterparts, that drivers will love, they can do the job, and what is stopping them is not a political issue, at least not an external political issue, nor the lack of a subsidy or an incentive. It is internal political will and leadership. And we often start engaging with corporate fleets by doing an analysis that we call our EV opportunity assessment, where we take their fleet data, we look at every vehicle in their fleet, how far it drives in a day, where it parks overnight, what's the payload, what's the climate that they operate in, and we rank them then and say, here are the parts of your fleet where an electric vehicle can both do the job, save you money, charging is easy to install, knowable cost. And I'd say 99 times out of 100, we identify massive portions of their fleet, 60, 70, 80% of their fleet that should be electric today, if they were just making a straight dollar and cents decision. And now I'm talking mostly about, to be fair, light and medium duty fleets. So up to delivery vans that you see with last mile delivery, or service vans that are fixing air conditioning in buildings. Heavy duty fleets are more difficult, and often that percentage where an EV makes sense is lower. And that's the critical message for, at a company level, is that it's not a blanket statement, EVs work or don't work for me. It is where they work. And where they work in a commercial context is getting wider every year. Like, they're working in more and more contexts as battery costs fall, as charging is more ubiquitous, as energy density of the batteries improves. But just with today's technology and the vehicles available today, large swaths of corporate fleets could and should be electric. And so it's a leadership issue, which I'm happy to talk more about. I could go on for a few hours on this topic. It is a leadership issue in fixing what I would call calcified corporate procurement processes. And the loss of 45W, while tragic and unfortunate, certainly I mean, I share Albert's views in terms of U.S. competitiveness and manufacturing prowess and everything. We could talk about that. But in terms of charging ahead and continuing to see EV adoption and bending the curve on emissions, there's nothing stopping most companies but internal will.
I think that's a quite a hopeful point. It's not to say it's easy either to win people over, and it does kind of feed into the political element to it. There's lots of myths and misinformation around electric vehicles, and it doesn't map against the realities. But there is a really considered education piece, I think, needed, and all these examples of best practice of it working in almost all use cases, which is there. And I think hopefully we can work together with you as a member, if you want to member, to really work on that. That's our objective as well. Just to turn to you, Chair Randolph, obviously this kind of certainty at a federal level or from a policy level is important, I guess, for states as well. But you've pressed ahead. CARB has pressed ahead over a number of political cycles, increased ambition. I just wondered if you could share some insights on how you've managed to do that, over a number of political cycles, and if there's any advice for any other kind of regional governments out there and how they can press ahead and demonstrate leadership in volatile political conditions.
Yeah, we continue to press on. When Congress repealed 3 of our rules, only 2 of which involved EVs, one of which was just a combustion rule, which sort of gives you an indication that this is really all about turning the clock back, which is very frustrating. We in California are really sort of thinking deeply about how we continue to make progress, and we've always sort of had this portfolio strategy, right? We use the regulatory framework's really important. Incentives have been really important. And using our convening sort of efforts and partnerships is another piece. But as we're having conversations with other states and other cities, one of the things we're really highlighting is that there's a lot that we can do without the federal government. There are local strategies that can be incredibly beneficial, and I'll just give you one example, which is around ports. And this is particularly relevant to the heavy-duty space. Pushing ports, which are usually run by local governments, to adopt policies that incentivize their drayage drivers, trucks that come into the port and take goods to warehouses, which are typically not that far away, incentivizing those through either local rulemaking or through things like green gates, where you get to go through the port more quickly if you have a zero-emission vehicle, or in the example of the port complex at Long Beach and Los Angeles, there is a container fee, a arguably too small container fee that everyone pays, and then the port can provide those funds to purchase zero-emission vehicles. That's an example of local action that can really make a huge difference and has created opportunities for charging companies to locate public charging for medium and heavy-duty vehicles at the ports. And take advantage of building that ecosystem. If you combine that with other types of regulatory action that can be achieved at the state level, like low carbon fuel standard programs, emissions trading programs, things that states can do all by themselves, and raise revenue, reduce emissions, and use those funds to incentivize the deployment of cleaner vehicles. There's so much that we as states can do together, and we partner in California quite a bit with other states through everything from the Under 2 Coalition, which is an international, subnational collaboration, U.S. Climate Alliance, where we collaborate with U.S. states, all of our air quality partners around the country. Since January of this year, we have been in constant contact with them about how we can continue to work together to make progress.
That's great. So yeah, how you're projecting outside as well, and working as a coalition of regional governments, really, obviously, really important dynamic. Just to stay with you, Chair Randolph. Sorry, bear with me. My things. Okay, I'm going to recall it from. I said the next question was, you've driven ahead with emission standards, but you've also some fantastic companies have been incubated and grown, have been part of the zero emission vehicle transition. Obviously, Tesla the most well known, but I was wondering what policies or what mechanisms have you used to kind of incentivize that innovation within California as well that others might learn from?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, our basic regulatory structure around the crediting system that we have that OEMs can share. If one is overproducing, they can sell credits to other OEMs who are underproducing. And that's what, famously incentivized Tesla. And as those rules are under attack, thinking about ways that we can continue to incentivize growth in California. The governor issued an executive order after Congress took action and asked us to explore as an agency with our state agency partners, what can we do to help incentivize deployment? What can we do? We have funds for infrastructure deployment, for instance, that agencies, other sister agencies that we partner with, provide incentives for that. And that has helped grow charging companies. That has helped grow, as I mentioned, the example of incubating just a small local company, workforce development, going out and repairing chargers. We are looking at what is next for our light duty incentive programs. The budget year ended this year before the legislature took action on potentially trying to backfill some of the federal tax credits. And so that's going to be a conversation next year about how we can directly incentivize that. And the legislature just reauthorized our Cap and Invest program, so that'll help create some funds that could potentially be used for that. I mentioned sort of, local rules, local opportunities. So we're continuing. There are thousands upon thousands of jobs in California that are centered around this sector, and we've exceeded our 2 million ZEVs on the road target. We're roughly about 25% of new vehicle sales are zero emission. And so that ecosystem continues to support new innovation, companies like Rivian and Lucid, who are California-based companies.
Yeah, you've got that economies of scale, and it's got its own momentum. Almost take the stabilizers off to an extent, well, hopefully in principle. So I think there's talking about kind of the depoliticizing and the jobs and competitiveness. Obviously, there's an argument now in California, but I just wondered if you could share your perspective a bit on that, Albert, on how do we communicate? How do businesses communicate that to government? The jobs and competitiveness angle. It's something we're trying to adopt a lot. As an environmental organisation, but we're really using these narratives. Competitiveness, job creation, economic growth, all these kind of things. And are you seeing companies willing to kind of use these narratives in a context of our agenda? And I wonder how can we encourage them to do it more?
Absolutely. I mean, it depends on which agenda, but I think just supporting investment in this new technology, which is going to be globally competitive for the foreseeable future, is kind of the minimum threshold. But there's a lot of support for that, and state chambers of commerce, local chambers of commerce also have been extremely vocal in supporting those. When you see governors go around the world and compete for these big factory investments to come into their state, I mean, they're unambiguously supportive of the company and the product, and there's local pride about it, but it's new. And so I think what I've consistently been trying to say this since July is we need to keep pushing and building that coalition. There's certainly a lot of improvement that needs to be made in how we talk about EVs and how we are communicating in a way where everybody feels as if they have a stake in this. It's why I talk so much about everything upstream of the vehicles. I'm a huge advocate for driving EVs, but I want to make sure that I am trying to speak to people who may never buy a new car, but they still have a stake in whether we're making decisions as a country that align with the success of their community and their state. So it's a lot of education, a lot of hard work, but there's a huge existing coalition that just needs to grow.
Yeah. Can I just say, I mean, Albert and Zeta have done a fantastic job on this, and as the one private sector representative up here who can kind of just say things without having to deal with political repercussions, I'll just say that those arguments have been made very, very articulately by Zeta and others, our fleet coalition. You need a willing listener. I mean, the facts are the facts. It's pretty clear that the globe is adopting EVs, that China is investing to dominate what is the coming automotive era of electric vehicles. There's very few people left that would say that, in 50 years we're all going to be driving internal combustion engines. I mean, vehicles. It's just not reality. And so the arguments have been made that from a jobs perspective, from a competitiveness perspective, we in this country need to be pushing forward on electric vehicles, on manufacturing, on critical minerals, and Albert's group and we formed a coalition of fleets to go up and advocate on Capitol Hill for these things. The arguments are out there, the data's out there. It's become politicized, right? Electric vehicles is a political term at this point. It is an argument not based on policy debate or reality or facts and figures. It's based on the same reason wind farms are getting canceled. It's just political. And so I certainly firmly believe, beyond my role, like my day job, I believe as an American we are hurting our economy and our long-term prospects. The example I used with a lot of congressional offices was, okay, this administration says they have broad support and want to support autonomous vehicles, and they want us to lead the world on autonomous vehicle technology. And yet, when you look at autonomous vehicles, with the exception of one company right now, all of them are electric. And what I kept saying is, okay, so we're going to have autonomous vehicle software and sensors on a Chinese-made EV. That's where it's headed. Is that winning in autonomous vehicles? If you're making the jobs argument and domestic manufacturing argument, I would say you're just going to have software engineers working on better sensors. So, I could talk about this for a long time, but I think that you have to have willing listeners and engaged kind of dialogue on these things. Making the case has been done very effectively, I think.
Yeah, without doubt, and I think we're unfortunately at time. We could continue this conversation a lot longer, but I think that's a really good point to finish. We need a willing audience. Making the right arguments the right way at the right time is really important. It's what we want to do with EV100. We want to share the knowledge with our members and share best practice. We've got projects in 10 different markets now, so a lot of the kind of points you were talking about competitiveness and the future of the automotive sector in the US and all the ancillary sectors, etc. We've got projects in Japan and EU and a lot of emerging markets who are really seeing opportunity. Vietnam, is 35% of new vehicles sold now in Vietnam are electric because of VinFast, the Vietnamese automotive manufacturer. So this is a global conversation, and the winners are the ones who accept and press ahead. There's going to be winners and losers, like with any transition. I think there is a lot of urgency to it, but I think municipal governments, states, and certainly our community of fleets have a really important role to play to communicate the message. As you said, Josh, a long way to go to get the people willing to listen, but I think that's the fight we have. And so if there's any corporate fleets, any companies in the room who are fleets, please do get in touch. Love to work with you more and add your voice to the policy debates. But with that, I'd just like to say a really big thank you to all for the insight and sharing your perspectives, and thank you to all for your attention today. And I hope you enjoy the rest of Climate Week.